Modern day college football may have lost a little of its charm. Too much focus on the playoff leading to less regionalism in the sport. Too many recruits willing to sit for 2 years before playing on super teams leading to more predictability. Too much care for which teams have better TV ratings. And way too much self-awareness about the whole thing. It wasn't that long ago, though, that the regionalism, the unpredictability, and the parody of America's second favorite sport were at an all-time high. So recent ago, in fact, that some of the participants still grace your TV screens each Sunday. This is what you don't know about college football's craziest season of all time, 2007. Welcome to What You Don't Know About Sports, where we delve into the forgotten stories, teams, and athletes of sports history and question widely held takes on today's sports. I'm Matt, and this is Blake.
Howdy.
And today we want to tell you about a special college football season that could use a Last Dance style, like multi-episode docuseries, the 2007 season. Blake, what is your most memorable season from any sport?
So we will stay with college to answer this question, but it's not football. My most memorable season, and probably because I was emotionally tied to it, you and I have had conversations about the memorability, the memorableness, the whatever.
We'll accept it.
Of being emotionally tied to a sports team, right? And the one team that I'm emotionally tied to is UNC Chapel Hill. And the most memorable team that I remember in my lifetime was the 2009 championship team, because they just dominated. It was buttery goodness the whole season. They swept Duke during the regular season when Duke was ranked at the top 10 twice. They went all 6 NCAA tournament games and won them all by double digits. Like, it was just, I think, like 8. They had 8 or 9 seniors on that team. They knocked Blake Griffin in Oklahoma out in the Elite Eight, I believe it was. They had 7 NBA players on that team. A guy I went to high school with was a freshman on that team. So it was a pretty memorable time.
Yeah, I think for me, it's the 1998 baseball season, partially being tied to a team. The Yankees were one of the all-time great teams that year. Kind of legitimately, not without a superstar, because they were all good players, but without that one, like, this is our guy, like the number one dude. But also that was the year that Kerry Wood struck out 20 people, kind of in the middle of the summer. It's the year of the home run chase, kind of the peak of that before we had to get into all the steroid stuff, when it was still quote unquote pure. There was a lot of things going on in that season that made it memorable for me. So I just thought that was cool. That's always been my favorite season, really, outside of the second would be the one we're going to talk about today, which is the 2007 football season, which was just ridiculous.
Bananas.
The regular season in 2007, just to refresh some of your memories about what was going on, we got rid of some crazy timing rules that existed in 2006. If you'll take yourself back, 2006 was the year that the clock started running on the kickoff. Like, as soon as foot contacted ball, they started running the clock. So there were some situations, I think I can think of a couple, where like games ended or halves ended on the kickoff. Like, you just launch it up in the air as high as you could and let the last 3 or 4 seconds run off. Can't believe that was ever a thing, but it was. I had blocked it from my memory until I was researching this, and I was like, oh my God. Yeah, that was a terrible idea. But the good part of the 2006 rules was the 40-second clock we have now, where the clock just starts running again. The play clock doesn't wait for somebody to set the ball, which is good. we were still using the BCS, which everybody hated at the time, but had some charm. So the top 2 teams using a computer formula and a couple of human polls played in the championship game, but also there were 3 other bowl games with ties to the ACC, the Big 10, Big 12, Pac-10, SEC, and remember these guys, the Big East.
What?
Yeah, they were an automatic qualifier back in the day before the ACC and Big 10 fully just devoured it.
Swallowed the Big East whole.
And the Big 12. I forgot. West Virginia went to the Big 12. Like, the whole thing just collapsed from a good conference to the American Conference. Reemerged in its spot. It's like Conference USA moved up and down all at the same time. Your preseason top 10 that year. USC coming off and still in their dynasty years. USC, LSU, West Virginia, Texas, Michigan, Florida, Wisconsin, Oklahoma, Virginia Tech, and Louisville from the aforementioned Big East. So just right there, something we don't see right now is the entire landscape of major college football was represented in that top 10. There were Pac-12 teams or a Pac-12 team. There were some Big 12 teams, SEC, ACC, Big 10, and Big East Big East had 2 representatives in the top 10. 6 conferences, all in the top 10. Something we don't see every day. I think that's the problem with college football rankings in particular, to me anyway.
I just want to make sure that we're all on the same page with the time period that we're in. This is almost 15 years removed. And so if you either don't remember or you were too young to have seen it, I'm going to give you some names, like Matt said in the intro. Some of these people are still playing in the NFL. And I just want to remind you of some of the people who were on some of these teams, okay? USC had Brian Cushing and the infamous Mark Sanchez, who was a freshman on the team and eventually took over. Yeah, butt fumble. If you don't know what that is, go look it up. LSU had Matt Flynn and Glenn Dorsey. I forgot about Glenn Dorsey. He won all kinds of lineman awards in this season. West Virginia had Pat White and Pat McAfee, which I did not know until this. I did not know McAfee went to West Virginia.
McAfee was on that team. Yes, he was. Yep. Oh, my God.
Our friend Ross will appreciate Colt McCoy and Brian Arakpo, who played at Texas.
I don't appreciate Colt McCoy, just for the record.
Redskins, or football team.
Yeah.
Michigan had Chad Henne, who was great in college, and Brandon Graham, who is still gracing the NFL field. He's still playing defensive lineman 14 years in. It's ridiculous. Florida, this was right in Florida's prime time. This was Tim Tebow, Cam Newton. Tim Tebow won the Heisman as a sophomore this season, but Cam Newton was his backup as a freshman. Also on this team were Percy Harvin and Aaron Hernandez. No more needs to be said about that. Nope, don't do it. Don't do it. Oklahoma with Sam Bradford and DeMarco Murray. I can't.
That guy would have killed to win the national championship that year.
Oh,
I'm just saying.
Gosh.
Keep going.
Oh my gosh. Okay, Virginia Tech. Tyrod Taylor was a freshman on that Virginia Tech team, and Cam Chancellor was on their defense. This is you forget about these things, and we've said this before also. It's really important to go back and look at these happenings in sports history because over time they tend to lose their charm and their magic and stuff. So we're trying to put you back there because we're about to take you through basically the entire season and all the craziness that happened, and we need to make sure that you're with us here. We're on the same wavelength before we start.
That's right. If you got one laying around, get your original iPhone and just stare at it. Maybe an iPad,
it was an
iPad, iPod, iTouch. iPod Touch. If you want to look at that, just to get yourself in the right frame of mind. The craziness for this season starts immediately in week 1. People in our immediate footprint here in North Carolina are very familiar with what I'm starting with. To this point in history, only one, what we're going to call FCS, the former 1AA, only one FCS team had ever defeated a ranked FBS team, 1A, but it comes with a caveat. The only time that had happened before this season, and so it doesn't always get counted. Sometimes people credit what I'm about to tell you as the first time it happened. Cincinnati, who has always been, or for a long time has been, an FBS team. In 1983, there was a rule enacted by the NCAA that to be a 1A school, you had to average 20,000 fans per game. Cincinnati had not done that, and so they were temporarily relegated to 1AA for 1983. And in the first week of that season, beat number 20 Penn State. They immediately went back to 1A the next year after suing. So technically, that is the first one. We'll put a star beside it. This season, however, two-time defending FCS champion Appalachian State went to Michigan. Yeah, went to number 5 Michigan in week 1. Here's some things I had forgotten. There was no betting line issued for this game. In other words, there was no amount of reasonable point spread that could have been issued. Like, I'm sure they could have said, here's Michigan by 120, and somebody would have been like, yeah, I bet App stays within 120. Let me throw some money on them. But there was no reasonable amount of points that could be offered to encourage betting on both sides of the game. So they just didn't issue a betting line. You could not bet this game. It also was the first game on the very new Big Ten Network that had just launched for this season. I'd forgotten that was a thing too. Appalachian State led by as many as 14 points at 28-14 just before halftime, but Michigan came back slowly at the end of the first half and in the second half, partially aided, and this is just a thing that I hate, partially aided by 6 points before and after the half due to the halftime turnover. This is a situation back in 2007 where coaches really still weren't accounting for the halftime turnover. They've gotten smarter about this now. But every once in a while, you still get a team that's like, we've got a good offense. We want the ball first. And you just want to slap the coach and say, no, you do not. You're going to think it's great. You're going to score a touchdown. That's awesome. And then it's going to get to halftime and you're going to turn the ball over for no reason because you're going to have to give it away. There is a turnover at halftime. You have to account for that. Anyway, Michigan would go on to score a little bit later to make the game 31-26 with 24 seconds left in the third quarter. But Mike Hart, their running back, failed a 2-point conversion. Michigan scored again with 4:36 left in the fourth quarter and again missed the 2-point conversion from Mike Hart. That left the door open for Appalachian State. They go down the field with 26 seconds left in the game. They score a field goal to take the lead by a single point. Now, in hindsight, you might go tell Lloyd Carr, who's the coach at Michigan, hey, if you kick your 2 extra points instead of going for 2, we're tied now. But it makes sense. Given the leads, it makes sense that they did it. They were down, or they scored to be down 5, so a 2-point conversion would have made it a field goal game. And then with the next touchdown they scored, a 2-point conversion would have made it a 3-point game again, but they failed on both. Anyway, App State looks like they're going to win. 26 seconds left, they kick a field goal. But Chad Henne, who you just talked about, here's a name that we may have forgotten from recent NFL history, though. Mario Manningham was a receiver on the Michigan Wolverines that year. Chad Henne hits him for a 40-yard gain late in the game to set up a field goal attempt for Michigan to save their reputation completely. But as we know, Appalachian State goes on to block that kick. Yes, they do. It's amazing. And seal the victory in what is still called, in most places, the greatest upset in college football history. It's one of the greatest upsets, period. App goes on to win its 3rd straight FCS title that year. And Michigan, to their credit, not terrible, not great. Would go on to be 9-4. They were unranked at the end of that season. They had a bunch of guys come back. Henne, Mike Hart, I think Manningham, but they had a bunch of guys come back for their senior seasons specifically because they wanted to try and win a national championship, and App State takes them out in week 1 to set the tone for this season.
Definitely this craziest upset in college football history, but maybe the greatest upset in sports history. And it's a combination of a lot of things, right? You've got an Appalachian State University football team who, if you're not from North Carolina, or you're not an FCS fan, or you didn't go to an FCS school, you don't care who they are and you don't care what they've done. But App had only lost 4 games over the last 2 seasons when they won their first 2 FCS titles. So they were extremely underrated going into this game and this season. Michigan turned out to be a little overrated, if we're being honest. They started the season as number 5, and they finished unranked. And if they had won out, this loss would have been like, yeah, it was fine. But they would have been ranked. They may have had a bowl game if this was their only loss, if they had won everything else. But they were a little overrated as well. But all of those things leading to this not being a betting line on this game, like, how underrated were they thinking App State was? How bad did you think they were, or how good did you think Michigan was to just say it's not even worth our time and effort to try and place a line on this game because it's going to be that bad?
Florida is going to end up being our next preseason top 5 team to lose. And they also lost to an unranked team. Auburn, just a couple of weeks later, shows up and beats Florida. And it hurt Florida so badly that they dropped that week a whole 2 spots in the rankings, because we all know that down south it just means more. So SEC bias apparently existed in 2007 as well.
Who knew?
Who knew? Wisconsin also drops from the top 5 the next week, losing to an unranked Illinois team. And for good measure, they followed it up by losing to Penn State the next week back to back. Just to prove that, hey, we can do better than everybody else in the top 5. We'll lose twice in a row.
Florida lost once. Watch this. We'll get them. We'll get them.
Not to be outdone, a bigger loss happened that same week. USC, who we mentioned, was the aforementioned number 1 team in the preseason. By this point, was getting 58 of 60 first-place votes. Ohio State were getting the other 2. They were coming in on a 35-game home winning streak. Again, this is still the peak of USC's dynasty, right? They're not far removed from the split national championship and the national championship win, and then the lost national championship 2 years removed from the end of that cycle. 35 straight home wins. They have a good team. They're coming up against a Stanford team whose quarterback had a seizure in the previous game and was out, leaving the starting duty to a quarterback who had thrown 3 passes ever in college football. Again, they're a 41-point favorite, but there are some things going on in Stanford's favor. First of all, the last team to beat USC in the Coliseum was Stanford. The last time they did that, they had a first-year coach at Stanford named Tyrone Willingham. This season, they had a guy in his first season at Stanford named Jim Harbaugh. To make it interesting, Harbaugh at Media Days had actually said that this would be the last season Pete Carroll would coach at USC. He wasn't right, but he wasn't far off. Things didn't go terrible for USC. They didn't play terribly. They did have an extra point blocked. But key to the game was that quarterback John David Booty, because that's a fun name to say, in his last start before Mark Sanchez took over, he threw 4 interceptions in the second half of that game, or 4 interceptions total, most of which happened after he broke his hand and continued to play. So a little mistake there on the coaching, letting him stay in the game, repeatedly throwing interceptions. USC loses the game, and ESPN at the end of the year would call it the second biggest upset of the year, which is saying something that it wasn't the first upset of the year. First of all, it tells you the magnitude of that Michigan State or Michigan Appalachian State game. But also in this season, this is the second biggest upset. There's a bunch of upsets this season. This one, the second biggest one, toppled USC, changed everything. Craziness.
Craziness, exactly. And I had forgotten about John David Booty, but that makes me smile on the inside every time his name comes up, like once in a generation, because that's just how it works. But Stanford, again, this may have been a situation where Stanford was a little You would look at some of these and say Stanford was a little underrated going into this game, thinking that they were a 41-point favorite. Stanford finished this season 4-8. This is only one of their 4 wins, and now
Yeah.
Jim Harbaugh was the first year head coach, and like you go through those growing pains. David Shaw was in his first season as their offensive coordinator, and so again, growing pains, especially in college when you're recruiting. I mean, recruiting is everything, and so that's a full time job in itself, much less being a head coach. So,
Tis but the tip of the iceberg. The next week, the last week before the BCS rankings would be released for the first time, we get one of the biggest weeks for upsets, period. Coming into the week, LSU was number 1. The Cal Bears were number 2. Now, this isn't the Aaron Rodgers Cal Bears or the Beast Mode Cal Bears, but it is the Deshaun Jackson Cal Bears. There's another name still running around out there. LSU is the first team to play. They're coming in, by the way, 58 first place votes, just like USC. Ohio State still getting the other two. There's, like I said, two riders in Columbus really wanted
yeah, they live in Ohio.
LSU came into the week number 1. They faced Kentucky in a surprising top 25 matchup. So what goes around comes around. We know that Kentucky's back. I guess Kentucky's back before Texas is back. That's an interesting thing.
Got him.
Anyway, the game goes to 3 overtimes. 3 overtimes before Kentucky pulls the game out and gets the victory. So number 1 has been defeated. When news of this reaches Oregon State, they know USC lost the week before. They know LSU has just lost. They're number 2 in the country. They've got convincing wins, and they're hosting a not very good Oregon State team. Fans were chanting, "We're number 1" throughout the game. Don't do that.
That's karma.
Ever. Yeah. They were chanting, "We're number 1" throughout the game. Oregon State is up 31-20 with 4 minutes, 10 seconds to play. Cal scores in 55 seconds. 55 seconds they score on a 67-yard touchdown, and they get the 2-point conversion to cut the lead to just 3. Oregon State recovers the ensuing onside kick, but gets stopped and has to punt the ball to Cal, who gets it on their own 6 with 1 minute and 27 seconds left. Cal's quarterback is a guy named Kevin Riley, who literally found out he was starting this game just before kickoff. Like, he was not planned to be the starter. But he leads them down the field a second time. He converts a 4th and 17 pass for 19 yards to keep the drive alive. And with 14 seconds left, the ball is on the Oregon State 12-yard line with no timeouts. Cal's got no timeouts, but they got 14 seconds and only 12 yards to go. Riley takes the snap, gets caught up in his reads, gets confused. Instead of throwing the ball away, he attempts to scramble. This is replayed over and over again for the rest of the season as like one of the crazy moments. He tries to scramble. He's tackled after just 2 yards, and time runs out before a field goal could be attempted to send the game to overtime. And then it got worse from there. Cal would go on to lose, counting this game, 6 of its last 7 after having a chance at being number 1. And prior to this game, the number 1 and number 2 teams in the AP poll had not lost in the same week since 1996. But they do it this week. And just to keep you hanging on the edge of your seat, it will not be the last time this season.
Number 1 and number 2. And this season is dubbed the curse of the number 2 for a reason. And yes, this is not the last time that number 1 and number 2 would lose in the same week. But back to LSU being number 1 against Kentucky and losing in triple overtime. This would not be the last time LSU, ranked number 1 in the country, would lose in a triple overtime game either. So we are just this is just going to keep going. Y'all need to hold on to your hats because this is getting fun.
And as I said, this is all before the first BCS rankings come out, so it's a perfect time, speaking of the BCS, for our trivia question. We're going to stump the Sykes right now. So One of the most common talking points in the lack of parity at the top of college football is to mention that the number of programs who actually play for national championships have access to that is not that high. In fact, if we count all the teams or all the available slots in the BCS National Championship game, 2 a year through 2014, and the 4 spots available in the college football playoff from then to now, there have been 60 available spots either in the championship game or the 4-team playoff in those years since 1998. 60 slots have been available, and they have been filled by a grand total of 19 programs total. 19 schools in the last 22 years have had a chance to play for a championship. Blake, how many of them can you name? You get questions. You get 10 total questions. So you're naming 19 schools. You get 10 questions. I know you know some of them off the top of your head. You're going to nail this. The people at home are going to nail this. We're going to get it. It's going to be perfect.
It's going to be a lot easier to shout out the champions.
Sure.
Not the ones who, like, especially like the 4 teams in the college football playoff. But this is going to get
there's
tough.
2 of those that actually I had completely forgotten about. Honestly, those are the 2 I struggled with. Not anything else. Those are the 2.
Nothing else at all.
Yeah.
So just thinking about the teams, what the years again are from 1998 to present day, basically.
Yeah.
And it's either the 2 teams playing in the FBS championship or the 4 teams that made the playoff. There's 19 total.
That is correct.
Okay. So I'm just going to start naming definite champions and maybe teams that I know played for the championship and lost.
Yes.
So Alabama's in it.
Alabama's one, obviously.
LSU is in it.
Yep.
Clemson is in it.
Yep. Although never until the playoff era, but yeah.
Yeah, that's true. Dabo Swinney era has done a number. Ohio State won the very first college football playoff, so they're in it.
Yep.
Florida's in it.
Florida
State is in it? Question mark?
Yes. Yeah, one of the early BCS teams and early playoffs mainstays. Yeah.
Okay. Cam Newton won a national championship at Auburn, so they're in it.
Yep.
Southern California's in it, and
Obviously.
Texas is in it because that's one of the more famous games. I know Notre Dame played for a national championship with Manti Te'o, I believe,
and his imaginary girlfriend, because she could be on the field and it wasn't too many people.
And the catfish, yep, that happened.
Yeah.
Miami should be in it, right?
Miami, yep.
And see, this is where it slows down.
You're slowing down.
Yep.
There's at least one easy. There's a couple of freebies left here.
I'm looking at a map of the country, trying to think of like who has made it.
You're down to 8 left though. So
that was 11. I wasn't keeping count. I was just I was just rattling. 8 left. So of the 8 that are left, I guess.
Yeah.
Are there any ACC teams that I'm missing?
In the current ACC, there is 1 team left
who have played in or won. Man, this is not easy.
I'm going to give you a hint attached to it. They were not in the ACC when they played for the national championship.
Did Virginia Tech play for one?
Yes, the Virginia Polytechnic Institute did play for a national championship with Mike Vick against Florida State. Yep.
Okay.
Second ever title game was that, I think.
Ooh, okay. So 7 left. So that was the ACC team. Now this is going to get really hard. Oregon has made the national college football playoff for sure,
and a BCS title game. But yep. They're in.
I said Texas. Nebraska has to have played in one of these.
Nebraska played Miami in a BCS national title game. That is correct.
Did Wisconsin play for one?
Wisconsin has not.
Okay.
So I'm going to count that as a question.
That's fine. So how many's left? 6?
You have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5. You've got 5
left. Oh.
Yep.
Oh man. All right. Yeah. This is gonna feel. This feels really obvious. Like I'm gonna feel. There's another one where you're gonna feel real dumb after. After you're told After you're told the last ones, but. All right. Let me think of a question to narrow it down. What conferences are they from? The 5
Feels like that's more than one question, but okay. There are 2 SEC schools, 1 Big Ten school, 1 Pac-12 school, and 1 Big 12 school.
All right, 2 SEC teams that are remaining, not LSU, Alabama, Auburn, or Florida.
Correct.
Okay. In honor of this episode, was Missouri good enough to have played for one? I know that they were
never.
in this. They were in this episode being decent, but
never.
Tennessee was not in any of them, are they?
Is that a question?
Can I just say Tennessee? Did that count?
Tennessee, not the Peyton Manning Tennessee, but the next year T. Martin led them to the national title game.
Ooh.
The very first BCS national title game was Tennessee, Florida State. So yes, Tennessee was in.
And another
still
one.
counted as a question.
I don't.
5 questions and 4 schools.
This is gonna be tough.
This is gonna aggravate you so much when you figure out who it is.
It's like the one that I can't think of probably.
Like you've got the 2 ones that are hard, and then you've got 2 that are very easy that you're just blanking on.
What about a Big 12 school you said?
Yep.
That I'm missing?
Yes.
Oklahoma
has like 2 BCS title games, several playoff appearances.
Yeah. It's like, wait a minute.
All right. So
I got stuck on the
3
SEC
schools
train.
and 5. 3 schools and 5 questions.
Has Stanford played in the football playoff or?
Nope.
Not Stanford. Washington State, Oregon State, Stanford, USC, UCLA, Arizona State. None of those. Like none of those are ringing a bell. I don't know if I have any more.
Didn't for me either. Yeah, you better use your questions to get at least 2 of these. You're gonna have to use your questions wisely.
What years did these?
Oh God,
3 appear? I don't know how else to narrow it down.
1 school, and I'll even tell you the conference. The Pac-12 school was in the college football playoff in the 2016 season. The Big Ten school was in the college football playoff for the 2015 season. And the SEC school that you have left, it was in the college football playoff in the 2017 season.
So they're all college football playoff teams. See, that's the problem when it expands. It's like you remember the national championship games, but
not
or the champions, but not necessarily all 4 because there's more than 2. I feel like Oregon State was decent at one point, and like in the recent history.
Oregon State was decent at one point in recent history.
Is it Oregon?
Not this recent.
I was going to say, is it Oregon State that made the college football playoff?
They made a BCS bowl, never made a championship game or a playoff.
What state is the SEC school in?
They're in the state of Georgia.
See? Dang it. Jesus Christ. UGA.
All right.
How did I skip Georgia? I was like South Carolina, Florida, Alabama. I skipped Georgia.
The good news is you've got 2 questions and 2 schools. The bad news is if you use the same question, you're going to end up with a 50-50 shot. So,
what are the school colors of the Pac-12 team?
Purple and gold.
Purple and gold in the Pac-12?
Purple and gold in the Pac-12. Well, and white. But
Purple
that's
and
everybody's color.
white is
No,
Washington.
purple and gold. Oh, it's Washington. We'll count it.
Washington made the football playoff. Oh, they had
Washington
a
made the football
Before
before
who was the
we banned
quarterback? They had a good quarterback that year. I don't remember his name.
before they banned the Pac-12 from the playoff. They got in.
Oh yeah. And then a Big Ten school that I'm missing. That Midwest area kills me. It's just like remembering all the states that are up there.
Their quarterback definitely kills me.
Who was the quarterback of this team? That's my final
Kirk Cousins.
Michigan State.
Michigan State.
I almost said Michigan State a long time ago, and I did not think they had made it, but I was wrong.
Yep. Michigan State. Jake Browning was the quarterback you were looking for Washington.
Yeah.
And I do just want to double check that it wasn't a weird Kirk Cousins left and then they got good. Nah, he was there.
Yeah.
No, Kirk Cousins was not a quarterback on this team. I'm an idiot.
Woo. I still got the question, though.
Which just goes to prove to my point further that Kirk Cousins is not good at football. That's just an extra piece of information for everybody. Connor Cook would have been the quarterback that year. All right.
I might have gotten that, but it's fine.
All right, so everything's fine. All right, let's move on. All of the carnage, you got it. All the carnage happened before the first BCS rankings. Like I said before, listen to the top 10 in the first BCS ranking. I'm going to tell you where they were ranked in the AP preseason top 25. Ohio State was number 1. They were preseason 11. South Florida was number 2. They were unranked. They had beaten Auburn and West Virginia, though. Boston College was number 3. They were unranked. Had beat a top 15 Georgia Tech team. LSU was number 4. They were preseason number 2. Oklahoma was number 5. Preseason number 8. South Carolina was number 6. They were unranked. Kentucky was number 7. Unranked. Arizona State was number 8. Unranked. West Virginia was number 9. They were preseason number 3. Oregon was number 10. Unranked. Just in the first half of the season, a whole host of unranked teams have moved into the top 10 on the backs of the carnage.
We could talk about this forever, but I wonder how much of it was the poller, like the coaches and the AP pollers and stuff, just getting it terribly wrong. The bettors getting it terribly wrong. Like something terrible happened to start it. This because all these teams who they thought were good, who were not, ended up not being as good as they thought. Yeah. Just ridiculous.
It is at this point that we run into the curse of the number 2s. Rutgers beat South Florida 30-27 on a Thursday night. That's the Ray Rice, Greg Schiano Rutgers there. So they beat South Florida, who was number 2, drops them out. FSU beats Boston College 27-17, dumps them out. Arizona beats Oregon 34-24 again on a Thursday night. You didn't want to be number 2, but you definitely didn't want to be number 2 on Thursday night football. Nobody wants to
play Thursday nights. Like any football, no one wants to play Thursdays, but continue.
No, did not. One caveat there. The Ducks, y'all may remember Dennis Dixon was their quarterback. He got hurt beating ASU. So Arizona State was number 5. Oregon was number 4 the week before this game happened. He got hurt at the end of that game. Tried to play in this one. Didn't really go well. He always had knee injury issues through the rest of that season in his career. But they lost there. Then we get to the last 2 weeks of the regular season, and it goes crazy. In week 12, just the 2 teams involved in this game make it crazy. But we get one of the most weird game of the centuries ever when number 2 Kansas faced number 4 Missouri in a border war in Arrowhead Stadium on the primetime game on ABC. Like, who would have ever and who will ever predict that again? If it to make it make sense for you, Kansas did have Aqib Talib on their defense. It did have consensus coach of the year, Mark Mangino. That didn't work out for him later, but he was that year. Missouri had only lost 1 game. They had quarterback Chase Daniel, and they had a freshman receiver, Jeremy Maclin. In that game, which was 2 versus 4, so it's not crazy, but Missouri wins the game of the century to continue the curse of number 2. But on that same day, earlier in the day, you mentioned this before, LSU goes to Arkansas where Darren McFadden, Peyton Hillis, and a whole bunch of other running backs suited up for the Hogs that day. Both teams matched each other at 14. They matched each other at 21. Darren McFadden threw a pass to Peyton Hillis to put the Hogs up with 5 minutes and 6 seconds left. LSU scored a touchdown with 57 seconds left, so they matched each other there. And the game finally ends in third overtime for the second time for LSU when LSU misses a 2-point conversion. LSU twice was number 1 in the country, twice played a 3 overtime game, and twice lost the same day as the number 2 team in the country also lost. It had been 11 years since that happened before this season. They did it twice in the span of 6 weeks in this season. But wait.
There's more.
There's more, because the next occurrence of 1 and 2 losing happens the next week when Missouri is number 1 and West Virginia is number 2. Now, if you remember the old BCS system, when you get to this part of the season, just win and you're in. Just win and you'll make it. Missouri's playing in the Big 12 title game. They may have been a little bit overrated. We don't want to mention that because it takes away from the fun of the story. Oklahoma was probably the best team in the Big 12 that year, but nobody told anybody else. They play Oklahoma in the Big 12 title game, and they get throttled. Oklahoma is the Big 12 champion. They lose. West Virginia faces their rival Pitt, not in the Big East championship game because Big East played a round robin, the way sports should be played. And they cannot do anything on offense. They had a huge offense with Pat White, Steve Slayton, that spread offense with Rich Rodriguez just running the ball over the place. They can't do anything, but Pitt and LaShawn McCoy could. Like, can you just listen to some of these schools that have these like top tier NFL talent in this season, and it explains like how this could happen. LaShawn McCoy did enough for Pitt to win. West Virginia actually had 2 chances in the fourth quarter to try and take the lead, but they were stopped on downs both times. The grand scheme of this season, after these 2 teams lose, is that after all of these conferences and all of these teams and all of these weird, I'm calling them weird, but they're not in that list that we went through. All these teams that could have been, we get Ohio State and LSU in the national title game because LSU were points away in overtime from being undefeated, but there are some what could have beens. There are a couple of schools that get lost in the shuffle here. First of all is Virginia Tech. Hadn't really mentioned Virginia Tech, whose actual name is Virginia Polytechnic Institute. Their abbreviation's VPI. Everybody remember that. It's not VT. Don't be that way. I told you Boston College's first loss was to FSU, and it temporarily paused a string of number 2 losses. Like, it happened 5 weeks in a row, or 5 out of 6 weeks. The one week it didn't happen, Virginia Tech was playing Boston College. Virginia Tech was up 10-0 with 6 minutes left in that game. But Matty Ice, he threw 2 touchdown passes in the last 2 minutes, aided by an onside kick recovery to win the game. 2 TDs in 2 minutes. If not for that situation, now VPI would lose again that season, but even so, that week they were ahead of Missouri, Kansas, and West Virginia when they lose that game. They could have been higher ranked there, and they still, even with the other loss, they still finished 3rd in the final BCS rankings after they recovered, after they revenged themselves in the ACC title game. They very much and very well could have been in that championship game. LSU needed several last-second wins to even make the SEC title game. Particularly, they needed a Matt Flynn touchdown pass at the buzzer almost to beat Auburn to get into the SEC title game, which put them again ahead of Virginia Tech. Virginia Tech was higher ranked than LSU going into the SEC title game. LSU jumped Virginia Tech as a result of that win. If they don't beat Auburn, they don't get that opportunity. It's not the college football playoff where we say, oh, Alabama, you didn't make the championship game. We still think you're good. Come play because people watch you. LSU would have been left out. And do you want the wildest one? Are you ready for the wildest what could have been?
Absolutely.
The wildest of all wild?
100%.
What is currently the worst team in FBS football, UConn, had a path to the national championship game. They lost to Virginia on a field goal with 3 minutes left the week before the BCS rankings came out. But then they beat South Florida when South Florida was still highly ranked. Now, again, they have the Missouri syndrome where they lost to Cincinnati and West Virginia big at the end of the season once they finally got good competition. But if they beat Virginia, they are in this conversation as a top 5 team that lost. That's just a couple of the what could have beens. Arizona State was really good and lost a weird game. So that's another team we could throw in here among the others with the Oregons and the whoever else that lost strange games. All those are part of this deal. A quick postmortem on this season. There were 59 upsets. So a ranked team losing to a lower or unranked team happened 59 times throughout the year. That's good enough for more than 4 per week of the season. 4 upsets per week. 13 teams in the AP top 5 lost to unranked teams. Not just 5, the top 5 teams lost. Unranked teams. The only season that happened more times in was 1967. They only ranked 10 teams that year. So sometimes the number 5 team lost to what would have been the number 12 team, and that counts. Here we got 25 teams ranked. The top 5 lost to unranked teams 13 times. That's almost one a week on average. But again, even with all the craziness, we got preseason number 2 versus preseason number 11. It was LSU's first appearance. They were the 8th team to play in the BCS national title game. But Ohio State had been there before, and we've kept that heritage up ever since. 19 schools, 60 slots. For 1 year, there was hope for regionalism and craziness and everybody having a shot.
Sad day. Sad day for the ACC. You and I are fans of ACC schools, and we talk about now how bad the ACC is in this particular college football season. Just because Clemson's not up there, and Carolina was highly ranked at the beginning of the season, and they've flaked out, and Pitt and Wake Forest have come out of nowhere, but that's a different story. And it just goes to show that while people think today the ACC is not a football school, it kind of seems like they thought that they weren't either back then. The whole East Coast, it just seems like the East Coast just doesn't know how to play football unless you're south of North Carolina. So unless you're SEC, no one on the East Coast, Big East, ACC didn't matter. Number 2 lost 7 times, all in the last 9 weeks of the season.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Multiple top 10 teams lost in the same week, 9 out of 14 times. It's just you can't make it up. One team we kind of forgot about, who ended up they were not in the preseason top 10. They made their way there early in the season. You mentioned Dennis Dixon being their quarterback. Him getting hurt had a terrible just ruined their season. They were number 2 in the country with 3 weeks left in the season. Mm-hmm. They lost to unranked opponents each of the final 3 weeks of the season, while ranked number 2, number 9, and number 17. Sad day. It's really sad day for Oregon, because that was, correct me if I'm wrong, but that was the beginning of like the Oregon Ducks as we know it today, with the flashy uniforms and the chromatic helmets and stuff. And Dixon ran that offense really well. So just unbelievably chaotic season. And go back and just YouTube some of these games. They're absolutely ridiculous.
Especially that the Cal Oregon State game. I had forgot that Versus was a channel before it was NBCSN, which is getting ready to get shut down. But like that game was on Versus, which is cool. I get caught up on. It reminded me how we looked at college football. It was very much we had the national championship game. We cared about the national championship game, but there was still some of that like regional holdover where we weren't trying to compare Virginia Tech to Oregon, or we weren't trying to say, well, we know the teams in the SEC are probably the best teams, so whatever. There was a little bit of, hey, we should probably just put the SEC champ against the Big 12 champ and just let that be the championship game. But it was never the way it is now, where we really don't care about the results on the field. It's like, here are the 8 schools that could play in the playoff, and as long as they don't lose twice, whichever 4 of them don't lose twice, we'll put them in. Regardless of if they win a championship or not, we're going to stick these schools in. It's just weird, and it fuels recruiting because those are the schools you need to go to win a championship. And it loses some of its shine. I know we're comparing it to a historically ridiculous season, but it just does bygone era. And I hope it's not gone forever. I hope we get that 12-team playoff they're talking about, because I think that fixes a lot of things to me. We can stop worried about the playoff all the time. We can start worrying about who's winning conferences again, which will be cool.
Yeah, I think expanding the pool, because like you said, there have been, since 1998, there have been 60 slots for teams to make the championship or to make the college football playoff, and only 19 have ever done that. And so it's recruiting. It's not as much about the on the field results. It's just who has the better players, who has the flashier players, and that means a lot in the polls. It's unfortunate because it seems to have watered it down a little bit. I hope it comes back, and the playoff should make it more interesting, and that way we can actually know whether a Cincinnati could beat an Alabama, or Wake Forest could compete against a Michigan State. Like there's just have no idea until it happens. But they're trying to predict that it wouldn't be good, and you can tell just by this season how bad people are at guessing what the results are going to be at the end of the season.
And forget the student athlete stuff, but they're still kids. They're still college age students that are going to screw stuff up. But to change the sports, for one shining moment, we had everything we could possibly desire for 15 weeks that fall. So just wanted to share that with you. Thought it was cool. Hope you thought it was cool. If you lived it, hope it brought back some memories. If you didn't, go find some of those memories. It was a really great season. Thanks for listening, everybody. If you got an idea, shoot it to us. We'll be happy to do it. Otherwise, goodbye.
Later. Thank you for listening to this episode of What You Don't Know About Sports. If you enjoyed what you heard today, please leave us a review, 5 stars only please, and hit that subscribe button wherever you listen. If you have a great sports story, we want to hear about it. You can connect with us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at WYDKAS Podcast, and on our YouTube channel at What You Don't Know About Sports Podcast. All episodes are written, recorded, and edited by us. Stay tuned for the next episode.
All right, we want to run it. We want to see what happens.
Nothing to lose.